arranged before the tournament dates were confirmed.
My sister's wedding is something I've looked forward to for a very long time, and it's very important to me, so I'm gutted about missing the final, but sometimes it just can't be helped.
The All Whites qualified for the final against hosts Papua New Guinea when they beat New Caledonia 1-0 last night. LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers have stormed back into the NBA basketball finals with a dominant 120-90 win over the defending champions, the Golden State Warriors, to cut the series deficit to 2-1. Game 4 in the best-of-7 series is on Saturday. And that's the news.
$20 billion to tackle the terrors of our time.
No one foresaw the organised, well-structured terrorism that you see in Daesh, ISIS at the present time.
Wrongfully convicted at 14, finally free.
Fully exonerates Devante, fully implicates Vincent Smothers and his accomplice, and also at least one police official for lying.
Foot to the floor.
Just drove a Lamborghini at Hampton Downs. 500 horsepower V10 engine. I never thought I'd be able to drive it flat out, but I had the foot to the floor.
All your news at Full Throttle. Susie Ferguson and Guy and Espin, a morning report, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, household debt is set to hit $500 billion, more than $100,000 for every man, woman and child in New Zealand. What happens when the party ends? And after 10, music pioneer and the father of Ethio jazz, Mulatu Astaki. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel mostly cloudy with rain at times. Clearing in Northland for a time tomorrow. Waikato to Taranaki, also Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Occasional rain with some heavy falls possible about the ranges tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairarapa, high cloud thickening and scattered rain spreading from the west at times. Whanganui and Taihape to Wellington, high cloud with scattered rain developing by evening, occasional rain tomorrow. Nelson and North Marlborough, rain at times, possibly heavy, clearing tomorrow evening. The remainder of Marlborough, Canterbury and central and north Otago, high cloud and a few spots of rain. Bulla to Fiordland, periods of rain with some heavy and possibly thundery falls. Dunedin, Clutha and Southland becoming fine, a few showers tomorrow. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, rain tomorrow, possibly heavy. And I'll have more news and headlines at 5:30.
Thanks very much indeed, Sharon. Lots on the programme tonight, and we're just going to begin with this. Two of the main banks have slapped major restrictions on lending to foreign buyers who want to buy New Zealand homes, effective from today. Sharon had this at the top of the news. We're just going to look at this in detail. Westpac says it will no longer lend to non-resident borrowers with overseas income, and ANZ has imposed a range of new requirements. Westpac would only accept borrowers on temporary resident visas if they had both a New Zealand address and New Zealand-based income, and the bank would require New Zealand citizens and permanent residents with overseas incomes to have at least a 30% deposit. That's up from 15%. ANZ, will they have a new range of requirements for people relying on overseas income, including one where the bank would only lend to people who plan to live in the houses they buy. It would not be offering any interest-only lending. Loans for bare land or construction and lending would only be available to individuals. ANZ said it would offer honour pre-approvals, and there were exemptions. We are trying to speak to both banks about this. In a statement, ANZ says it's making the changes to ensure it was appropriately positioned in the current housing environment and was taking into account supply pressure in certain areas. Westpac and other major banks made a similar move in Australia in April. We really want to ask the banks, how big is the non-resident purchasing they currently have mortgage exposure to? As trading banks announce those moves, the Reserve Bank is targeting resident property investors. That's New Zealanders. By far a bigger driver of the market, of course, considering clamping down further on their access to credit to buy houses. This is property investors, locals. The Central Bank Governor, Graham Wheeler, refused to say what form the measures would take, but hinted they would come in before the end of the year. Our economics correspondent Patrick O'Mara reports.
Auckland's housing market has refused to buckle under Reserve Bank pressure aimed at reining in house price growth, which is starting to accelerate again. And it's not the only region where house prices are gathering pace. The Reserve Bank Governor, Graham Wheeler, openly concedes that puts the health of the financial system at risk. But he's not giving up yet. Speaking at the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee today, he told Labour's Grant Robertson that the central bank's exploring further measures to tighten the credit noose for investors.
In Auckland, investors account for about 46% of the transactions. For the rest of the country, it's around 40 or a bit more, so it's very significant. That's providing a lot of impetus in the market. So that's one area that we're looking at around the LVRs, around investor activity.
Do you have a figure in mind for that?
No, we're still doing analysis.
Measures to introduce loan limits based on income levels, called debt-to-income ratios, are also in the pipeline. The Reserve Bank's Deputy Governor, Grant Spencer, acknowledges they're complex and difficult to implement, but he insists first-time home buyers won't be the hardest hit.
If you look at the lending that is high debt to income, it's a much bigger proportion of that lending that is investor lending than is owner-occupied lending. So a debt to income, the appropriate threshold in terms of the hurdle, will tend to impact investors more than owner-occupiers.
Mr Wheeler says tougher controls for investors could be introduced before the end of the year, though debt-to-income limits are some time off. He declined to outline what changes he's considering. At present, the Reserve Bank's measures are limited to Auckland property investors, who cannot borrow more than 70% of the value of a property. The chief economist at the ASB Bank, Nick Tuffley, says the limit could be lowered and a wider net could be cast to capture investors nationwide.
One option for Reserve Bank is increasing the size of deposit need in Auckland for investment properties. They could look at expanding that investor deposit restriction elsewhere around the country, given there's a degree of spillover coming through.
But Nick Tuffley warns these tools have limits.
The challenge with all of these tools is that the impact on the housing market at least does wear off after a period, so up to 6 months seems to be all we can hope for with some of the tools that are coming through. But there are other aspects that these tools do have which are longer lasting. For example, banks' share of loans with only low deposits has actually reduced as a result. So you've had changes in the banking system. The impacts on the housing market, however, have been temporary.
The Building and Housing Minister, Nick Smith, is coy about the Reserve Bank's plans to target investors, but he admits investors have crowded out first-home buyers.
I've been quite open about the fact that the government wants to screw the scrum in favour of the first home buyer relative to the investor. That's why we've introduced the Home Start scheme, $430 million. That's why we've increased the tax obligations on those that are investing in properties. That's why we supported the Reserve Bank Governor when he put tougher LVR rules on investors as compared with owner-occupiers of houses.
But Labour's finance spokesperson Grant Robertson says the government could solve this crisis easily by building affordable houses itself. And he says their failure to do that is what's putting the financial stability of the country at risk. For Checkpoint, Patrick O'Mara.
5:15. The government is considering a cash injection for a South Auckland marae that's taking in the city's homeless. Te Puia marae is full of families who've turned up there because they had nowhere else to go. Last night, Checkpoint spoke to an 11-year-old girl living at the marae who had been sleeping with her family in their van since February.
Mum, Dad, my 3 brothers and 2 sisters, and me.
So in total, how many of you?
That's 8. The hardest part is actually not being able to read in the van, because you don't have space. They're all up in your face.
Yeah, I bet. Wriggling. Have you got little brothers and sisters?
Yes.
Yeah, they wriggle, don't they? They're never still.
Yeah, and there's not much light because we'll waste the battery. I can't read.
It's TA who we spoke to last night, 11 years old now with her family at Te Puia marae. The Social Housing Minister, Paula Bennett, says Ministry of Social Development officials are now looking at giving the marae more money to look after the influx of people.
Actually, the Māori Party raised it with me the other night, and so I said that I would have a look at it.
And what sort of fund would it come from?
I'm not sure. As I say, I've just asked the officials for some advice, and I'm waiting for that to come back.
Any plans to visit the marae yourself?
No, but I am planning on meeting. I've cancelled some other appointments to make time to meet the chairman tomorrow.
Paula Bennett says the government's already given Te Puia marae about $10,000 through Te Puni Kokiri.
Government are doing a lot, and there's just no doubt about it. You can see new builds coming on board. We're freeing up land for that. We put in all this extra money, 41 million for emergency housing, but we've still got some people in need, and they've opened their doors, and we have given them some funding to help them. And as I say, I've asked officials for some advice.
Social Housing Minister Paula Bennett. Checkpoint asked to speak to the Minister on the programme this evening about TA, that 11-year-old girl we spoke to on the programme last night. The Minister's office says she wouldn't talk to us before we got a privacy waiver. We should say the last time we got a privacy waiver at the behest of the Minister's office, she didn't front anyway. As for TA herself, your feedback has been remarkable. Offers of money for school fees, offers of books, offers of financial support, even from listeners overseas. Thank you all. Because TA is an 11-year-old, we're passing this on to her family and to Te Puia Marae, and we'll update you what's happening with her family and with TA herself in the coming days. Last month, Checkpoint revealed that homeless people living in WINZ-approved emergency housing were running up thousands of dollars, even tens of thousands of dollars in debt to WINZ for their emergency housing. We also revealed this emergency housing was often motels and lodges, charging over $1,000 a week for small and very basic accommodation. The government has announced that from September, WINZ will fund emergency housing for a week. It will be free for the people in it, but is a week enough? A month on, the two families we first visited in emergency housing, when we first told this story, are both still in emergency housing. Twain Murray is one of them, and I went to see her again this afternoon.
But yeah, this will be our fourth week in here. So.
And I have your papers here. So you have, when we first came and saw you, you were next door, weren't you?
Yeah,
yeah right. Yeah. And you were paying how much a night for that room?
$165 a night.
And now I see you're paying $205 a night. So that's $2,870 for 2 weeks?
Yeah, that's correct.
And where's the money for that coming from?
Exactly, the government.
So WINZ,
yeah.
You go, in fact, this is an application, right? You go and apply for an emergency housing allowance?
Yeah, an extension on to be housed here, for emergency housing.
And so you pay $205 a night for this room that you're in with your partner and your son who's in a wheelchair?
Yeah, Kaya.
And then you are accumulating debt with WINZ. How much do you owe now, do you know?
Roughly about $8,200 and something. Yeah, that's my debt to WINZ.
And have you started to repay it?
As of next week, I apparently am. $27 a week.
Okay, so is $27 a week being deducted from your benefit?
Yeah.
And how much do you get?
I get $243 a week.
So that's your weekly income. Is that the totality of your weekly income? Do you get anything else?
I get Working for Families tax credit, which is $92. And my son's, he gets a child disability allowance, which is $92 every fortnight.
So you're earning under $500 a week, and you're paying $205 a night to stay here, which is money you're borrowing from WINZ.
Yeah, exactly.
Does that make any sense to you?
That's crazy. Nah, makes no sense at all. It's stressful. It's very hard. Yeah.
Do you talk to WINZ? Do you talk to people about, please just give us a house, please just give us somewhere to live?
Yep. Yeah, the same story. We've told our story so many times, and it just seems to be falling on deaf ears. And yeah, the more they don't listen, the more we're accumulating this debt, and I'm not going to be able to pay it.
And you live week to week in the meantime. So what happened? You went in on Tuesday and got more emergency funding money, right? Some more emergency housing money. How long does that keep you here for?
That's for 2 weeks, yeah. We have been doing it weekly, but we decided to do 2 weeks because it's just getting too hard. It's very stressful. We don't have a car, and we've had to go to Onehunga WINZ, and as well as go to AAAP to help me. So we go to Onehunga WINZ, and yeah, we don't have a car, so it's like weekly we go there. Yeah, it's just too hard. So we asked for a 2 week extension, and they gave it.
And at the end of the 2 weeks, what happens then?
I'll have to go and get another extension if I'm not housed.
Borrowing money.
Yeah.
To pay $205 a night to stay here.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's how I feel.
So what would a win look like for you? What would be the best thing that could happen for you now, Twaini?
To be housed, to be out of here, to stop my debt and be housed, yeah.
Twaini Murray, who was paying $205 a night to stay in that emergency accommodation, money she is borrowing from WINZ and repaying at the rate of $27 a week out of her benefit. Coming up, Pharmac announces it will fund 6 new treatments. Its chief executive joins us to discuss which drugs. 20,000 people affected by the Hep C treatment. Really big news for them. A widely used pregnancy test kit is being investigated by MedSafe, and we'll show you the new technologies aimed at wiping out rats, stoats and possums. We'd love to hear from you. We really appreciate your feedback. Text 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. And of course, as you know, we are on Twitter and we have a really busy Facebook page. The people behind New Zealand's big new media company, are rejecting suggestions they will use their power to block some people from watching their favourite TV programmes. The comments come after Sky TV and Vodafone announced plans to merge. Critics have said the new company could use its dominance to leverage people into signing up to Vodafone, because if they don't, they might miss out on getting Sky TV programmes. But this charge, has been categorically rejected. Eric Frickberg has been looking at this.
Both Vodafone and Sky TV deny they'll use the power of their future company to squeeze customers out of existing agreements with their internet service providers and compel them to sign up with Vodafone. The chief executive of Sky TV, John Campbell, says it won't happen.
You'll not have to be a Vodafone customer to get Sky, and you won't have to be a Sky customer to get Vodafone.
That fear of undue pressure was based on Vodafone possibly using Sky's most popular programs to compel people to sign up to Vodafone, not Spark or 2 Degrees, for fear of missing out. Andrew Cushion of Internet New Zealand puts it this way.
If you can only see Game of Thrones if you're with Vodafone, then that's the sort of thing that distorts a competitive environment.
The chief executive of the Telecommunications Users Association, Craig Young, says his members have similar worries.
We like to watch the All Blacks live, and at the moment you don't have to be a Vodafone customer to do that. We would like to see the commitments to accessing that content without having to be a Vodafone customer.
The argument goes that if Sky TV's content, such as sport and news, is one of its richest assets, why should Vodafone agree to supply such a valuable product to a rival in the internet business? The head of Vodafone, Russell Stanners, says that argument misses the point. He believes there's more money, not less, to be made by spreading out the service to other outlets.
Content's always looking for different networks to go over and deliver to different devices, and we're pretty excited about the opportunity to look at new exciting formats over time and how we can deliver that content. So I think for your rugby fans out there, you've got the choice you got today, and hopefully bring this deal together and innovate in the future. There's a lot more options for them going forward.
Media Convergence, as this process is known, has been going on ever since Sony bought Columbia Pictures, so it would have films to show on its VCRs. The process has accelerated sharply in recent years. Grant Williamson, who's a director at the investment company Hamilton Hinton Green, says a merger of some sort in this country was anticipated by the market, which is glad it's now underway.
The first impression is very good from investors. We've got Sky's share price up 17% here at the moment. It's been rumoured for some time, but we've now got the facts out on the table, and at the same time, still a lot of water to go under the bridge before it's a done deal.
The deal has the backing of the directors of Sky TV, but must be voted on by shareholders. In addition, it'll go to the Overseas Investment Office and the Commerce Commission for approval before it's finalised. Meanwhile, Vodafone's big rival in New Zealand, Spark, is shrugging off any challenges to its position from the new company, saying it won't be a threat. For Checkpoint, Eric Frickberg.
The husband of a zookeeper killed by a tiger says the Hamilton City Council took too long to take responsibility for her death, harming their family. The council today pleaded guilty to failing to protect Sam Kudawe. The zookeeper with more than 20 years' experience died after being attacked by an 11-year-old male tiger called Oz at the city zoo in September of last year, Maya Burry reports.
WorkSafe took the council to the Hamilton District Court for breaching the Health and Safety in Employment Act. It says the council failed to take all practical steps to make sure 43-year-old Sam Kudaway was not exposed to hazards while working. Today, the council's chief executive, Richard Briggs, says it acknowledges that failure.
No one should die on the job. Everyone should go home at night. Health and safety is my responsibility as Chief Executive, and I take that responsibility extremely seriously. Council's guilty plea today recognises that the practical steps as outlined in the WorkSafe prosecution were not taken, and as a result, Sam died. We take responsibility for this.
But speaking outside court, Ms Kudaway's husband Richard, who also worked at the zoo but hasn't since returned to work, says the council has been very slow to take responsibility.
They haven't, and in turn have done so much more damage to us.
Ms Kudaway was attacked by the tiger after she entered his enclosure not knowing he was roaming free. Richard Kudaway says an incident in 2013, when a keeper had a close call with a tiger, should have been all the warning signs the zoo needed that something might happen again.
Every effort at that point should have been made to never have that situation occur again, and it wasn't. And Sam was killed.
The council's community general manager, Lance Vervoort, says there are some circumstances around Sam Kudaway's death which may never be known.
Our own investigation revealed that human error occurred on the day Sam was killed, but we'll never be absolutely sure what actually happened and why that happened. But we have to reiterate that we have responsibilities to ensure that our staff remain safe even if human error occurs.
Mr Vervoort says they've made a number of changes since September. He says they now have a second staff member acting as an observer whenever a keeper is dealing with the zoo's 5 tigers, including Oz, which is still at the zoo.
We've not only done that for tigers but also other dangerous animals such as chimpanzees. The changes that we've made to the way we manage dangerous animals, look, they're not going to bring Sam back, but we've done everything practical and within our knowledge to improve safety for the staff who manage these dangerous animals.
The council has requested a restorative justice conference with the family before sentencing in September. It faces a maximum fine of $250,000. For Checkpoint, Maya Burry.
Coming up later in the program, the details of Pharmac's big announcements today, but a widely used pregnancy test kit is being investigated by MedSafe because of reports that tests showed women were not pregnant when in fact they were. The Easy Check pregnancy test is government subsidised and is used by hospitals, medical practices and family planning. The company says its own testing has shown no problems, but at least one women's health group is calling for a recall. Rowan Quinn reports.
The Auckland Women's Health Council says if there's any doubt about the quality of the tests, then they should be immediately recalled. Its spokeswoman, Linda Williams, says an incorrect result is a huge concern.
It's denying women time to make choices about whether they continue to drink alcohol or whether this pregnancy is welcome or not welcome, and they may be thinking of terminating the pregnancy.
MedSafe, which oversees the safety of medical devices for the Ministry of Health, says it's had several reports from doctors, district health boards and community providers about either false negatives or technical faults. Family Planning says it's had reports of problems with a small number of tests which work by measuring hormone levels in urine. Its medical advisor, Christine Roke, says they've mostly been about the test results being unclear rather than wrong, but she says a false negative result would be a serious problem.
All tests do have wrong results occasionally, so I think that it's important for people to be aware that if they get a result that they don't think is right, then they need to think about whether to repeat the test or seek some help about it.
Phoenix Medcare, which makes Easy Check, says there's no cause for concern. Its managing director, Brad Rodger, says it regularly has the product tested by independent labs and they show it's performing well. He says since last July, Phoenix has distributed 500,000 tests and only heard of 2 potential cases of false negatives from MedSafe and a handful of inconclusive results. Mr. Rodger says it's possible for the tests to deteriorate or for people to use them wrongly.
If you're testing later in the day and there's been a lot of fluid intake, for example, that could dilute your urine, and therefore if you are very early on in pregnancy, say 10 days or so, it could show a negative result when potentially you should be waiting until the next morning first thing and giving yourself the best opportunity for a test to work properly.
MedSafe says it's asked the company for more information about the product and is encouraging anyone who's had problems to come forward. For Checkpoint, Rowan Quinn.
Coming up on Checkpoint, good news for advanced melanoma patients after Pharmac announced it will fund Opdivo from July 1st. Big news for Hep C sufferers too. The All Blacks name an experienced lineup to play Wales and Auckland this weekend, first test of the year. Our intrepid Christchurch reporter Colin Young gets a close-up look and a whiff of new technologies designed to wipe out stoats. And we do hope to have more on the suspended search on the West Coast for a toddler and a man missing from a vehicle in a swollen river. All of that and more coming up before 6 o'clock. But now with the time at 5:32, here's Sharon Brett-Kelly with the headlines.
Thank you, John. Two major banks have placed restrictions on lending to foreign buyers who want to buy houses in New Zealand. Westpac says it will no longer lend to non-resident borrowers with overseas income, while ANZ has also imposed tough new requirements. Both banks will require foreign borrowers to have at least a 30% deposit. ANZ also will lend only to people who plan to live in the houses they buy. And the Reserve Bank is considering introducing even tougher rules for property investors to rein in surging house prices. As Governor Graham Wheeler says prices are accelerating in Auckland and other regions, adding to concerns about the health of the financial system. The weather and failing light have forced emergency services to suspend a search for a toddler and a man missing from a vehicle in a swollen river near Harihari on the west coast. The 66-year-old and the 2-year-old girl haven't been sighted since the four-wheel drive became stranded on the flooded Poirua River about midday. Pharmac will fund 6 new treatments aimed at helping more than 40,000 people each year. Extra money in the latest budget will buy the newly licensed drug Opdivo for the treatment of advanced melanoma, as well as drugs for hepatitis C, the kidney condition nephrotic syndrome in children, and patches for menopausal women. A new drug for brain tumours will also be available later. The government is considering giving more money to Te Puia Marae in Auckland, which has been taking in homeless people. The Social Housing Minister Paula Bennett says she has asked officials to look at extra support for the marae. A fatal crash has closed part of State Highway 23 between Whatawhata and Raglan in Waikato. The police say a car collided with a truck about 3 o'clock. Diversions are in place, but there may be delays. And I'll be back at 6 o'clock with more news.
Thank you very much indeed, Sharon. We will have more on that Pharmac announcement whenever we're finished. Nona, you and I, when we're done. Nona Peltz's here with Business News. Nona, you predicted it last night. Bernard Hickey predicted it last night. The tea leaves predicted it too, I think. The Reserve Bank went nowhere today. But let's start with the market reaction to the Vodafone Sky merger.
Exactly. Well, that was a big reaction as well. I mean, even though this has been in the market for a while, it wasn't exactly a huge surprise to people who follow these companies closely. But in any case, the merger is underway. They're looking forward to moving these companies together. That's Sky Network Television and Vodafone New Zealand it's a big deal. It's a big merger. But okay, so how did that shake through the market? We saw their share price, that Sky Television share price, rise 17% today. It was up a little bit more than that. Wow. Back a bit.
I want to come in there because Sky have drifted off about 30% over the past 12 months, haven't they?
Yeah.
So a 17% rebound says the market didn't like where they were heading and the market thinks this is a pretty good response, right?
Well, the market does say it's a pretty good response. And not so much for Spark, on the other hand. Spark, is being very brave and saying, well, we've been competing with these folks for a while and we're going to carry on doing it just as well as we did before. Nevertheless, their share price fell another 5% today and it was 4% down yesterday. So that hit the market a bit and we ended up with the market down a little bit in the red. That's about a third of a percentage point by 21 points to 6,971. That's a top 50 index. So.
Right, that's a reflection of Spark's weighting in it, I guess.
Yeah, it was. And it was really quite large volume. About half of the day's volume was a combination of both Sky and Spark.
Well, wait a second. So these people were switching from Spark to Sky, right?
Well, some of them were.
It's extrapolation.
There might have been some additional players in the market there.
Sorry, and we don't do extrapolation on Radio New Zealand.
We don't. No, we've used the real numbers here.
The Reserve Bank went nowhere. People had picked this, hadn't they? So 2.25.
Never mind, though. The reaction was quite remarkable, in fact. Yeah.
So the Sky TV, the reaction was on the share market. The Reserve Bank, the reaction is with the dollar, right?
Exactly. Well, it went to a one-year high. So it just soared way past 71 US cents, which you would say, gee, that's an awful big jump. That's nothing compared to what it did with the Australian dollar. No, it went up 1.5 cents, more than 1.5 cents against the Australian.
So exporters are going to be sitting there just banging their
They're
heads
going to be
against
saying,
the wall,
oh
aren't
my
they?
goodness.
And if you are an exporter who also happens to be a dairy farmer, in other words, if you're making milk, then this is just disaster after disaster, isn't it?
But on the other hand, we do see that dairy prices are traded in US dollars.
Okay.
So maybe it's not as bad.
Wow.
In any case, the interesting news with the US dollar is that we won't know what's going to happen with the New Zealand dollar until later next week.
We never know.
We never really know. But in any case, look, the New Zealand dollar, the story on the Australian dollar is the real story, because I was talking to a currency trader, Sam Tuck at ANZ, and he said, look, we're at 95.6 Australian right now. 95.6 Australian cents. It's quite high. He says, look to 96, 97. Anything could happen. It could happen sooner than later, but he's picking up to 97 on the Aussie. Not quite a parity party yet, but we're moving that way.
Wow.
And on the New Zealand on the US cross is 71.4 US cents.
Nona Peltier, Auckland business reporter who joins us in the studio every night. Thank you, Nona. Let's go to that Pharmac announcement. It will fund 6 new treatments to treat an extra 40,000 people each year. It follows the government. So I'm just going to update this intro, actually, because there's new information come to hand. From July, new drugs will be available for the treatment of advanced melanoma, hepatitis C. This is a big announcement. And nephrotic syndrome in children. Patches for menopausal women and a new drug for brain tumours will be funded later this year. Now, this afternoon, I spoke to Pharmac CEO Stefan Krauser, and I began by asking him about the impact of that new hepatitis C treatment, which cures the disease, full stop, on patient lives.
Hepatitis C in its end stages can be really devastating, and this treatment cures the virus in most people and basically gets rid of all that effect and lets them move on. I think it's just such a great result for New Zealand patients, New Zealand health system.
Is this a new drug?
It is, yeah. It is a new drug, and there's a whole series of them, and this is the one that we've selected and worked really, or these are the two actually that we've selected and worked so well with the companies to make this available. Because I don't know if you know, but there's been quite a bit of contentious activity internationally. The $1,000 pill and $100,000 per patient. But we've been able to work really well with the companies to put together a package that enables New Zealand patients to be able to access these treatments.
Okay, so once that has been efficacious, in other words, once hepatitis C is cured, surely the cost of this would go down over time? You're treating fewer patients?
Yeah, that's right. So there's a limited pool of patients, and the more patients we can get to with these treatments, the better. And that's certainly what we would hope to see. Also, just to think about, as people progress with hepatitis C, there's a lot of medical management that's required.
Yeah, absolutely.
That wouldn't be required anymore, and that's really just...
Okay, so an initial large upfront cost, but over time a saving of money. Let's talk about nivolumab, Opdivo. So this is for advanced melanoma. Of course, there has been so much talk of the appropriate treatment for advanced melanoma. This is a new immunotherapy drug. Pharmac had issues around efficacy. You are persuaded this is efficacious.
Yeah, I mean, it's really important. Look, if we're going to be investing tens of millions of dollars in a new treatment, we want to be really convinced that it's going to do what we all hope. And with nivolumab, looking at the data, getting the advice from the experts that advise us, we have that confidence that we're going to see and get survival gains. People are going to be able to live longer as a result of receiving this treatment. And we're just really thrilled to be able to provide access to those patients.
And the people who are going to receive it have put out a statement saying they're thrilled to bits too. So this is fantastic news for them, and they are heralding it as such. You were speaking in very certain terms about its efficacy. It's not many weeks and months since there was doubt about its efficacy. Were you too cautious in terms of your move to embrace this new immunotherapy?
Yeah, well, look, the doubts that we had were actually around a different product.
Keytruda.
So a product called Keytruda, yeah. So, I mean, it's a similar type of product. It sort of works in the same way, but, we really need to say and see the evidence that proves that it's going to do what it says. And we just hadn't seen that with Keytruda. That's why we were sceptical about it. That's why we thought the best thing to do actually is to make sure you're selecting the right thing, make sure we're doing the right thing by New Zealand patients.
I want to quote from the statement that's come out accompanying this announcement. It says, feedback from the health sector played an important part in these funding decisions. Yep. What about feedback from the patients? And if we look at the treatment for advanced melanoma, there was an intense and emotive lobbying effort undertaken by people with advanced melanoma and their families and their supporters, including oncologists. To what extent does that have an impact?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely has an impact. We need to hear from people about their experiences, what the need is, what the impact on their family is. All those are really relevant considerations for Pharmac, and it happens across every area of medicine that we deal with, and we really rely on it, and we really appreciate it. It helps us keep really real, that we really understand what's really going on out there for people and in their families.
Because people were saying, hold on a sec, this isn't how Pharmac works. This is emotive, it's manipulative. What do you say? Marches, petitions, meetings outside Parliament. Is that the way to speak to Pharmac? How do people go to you and say, hey, we think this drug is fantastic, we think it will work, and by God, we want it? Yeah,
plenty of ways. We make lots of opportunities available for folks to do that, and also it's good to hear in different ways and hear the passion of folks that are affected by all of these decisions that we make. It really is so important to us. And Pharmac needs to take all of that together, balance it up with all those other factors like, is it really going to do what it says, and what else wouldn't we be able to fund because we've only got limited resource, and is that something that's an acceptable balance given all the things that we know? So, I think it's been a good process. Pharmac's, I think, responded quickly and appropriately quickly to what is absolutely and undoubtedly a pressing health need and a health issue for people with advanced melanoma. That's why from today it's 3 weeks only until access would be made available through District Health Board hospitals. And if we think about these, their infusions, you have to go to hospital, it takes a couple of hours. All those services need to be in place and ready to go. It's not just about saying, well, here's a drug and there's some funding for it. Actually, there's other things that go around it.
Stefan Krosshor, who's the CEO of Pharmac, and I was talking to him earlier this afternoon. We're just going to go to Wellington now. When is it right to send a person to prison for the rest of their life? That's the question at the heart of a case being heard at the Court of Appeal, where the Crown is arguing 2 murderers with extensive criminal history should have been sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justin Vance Turner and Shane Pierre Harrison carried out separate murders while on their second strike. Under legislation known colloquially as the 3 strikes law, people who commit murder on their second or third strike must be sentenced to life in prison without parole unless that's manifestly unjust. What's this all mean? Our court reporter Edward Gay has been at the Court of Appeal and he joins me now from Wellington. Hi Edward, nice to talk to you as always. Has the sentence of life without parole ever been handed down in New Zealand?
Yeah, g'day John. Well, no, it hasn't, and both sentencing judges in Turner and Harrison found that would be manifestly unjust. Matthew Downs for the Crown today said that Parliament passed this legislation to protect the public from repeat violent and sexual offenders and to save victims from repeatedly having to turn up to parole board hearings. He described the sentences for Turner and Harrison as manifestly inadequate, and they were sentenced to life in prison with minimum non-parole periods of 15 and 13 years respectively.
Right.
Turner kicked and punched 48-year-old Makbul Hussain to death, stomping on his head in an hour-long attack. He had only been out of prison for a matter of months after beating his partner so bad that she had to be put on life support. And Harrison, in a totally separate incident, he was involved in a rival gang shooting and has a historical conviction for manslaughter.
Right, so Edward, they were both on their second strike and the Crown says both should get life without parole, full stop.
That's right. Mr Downs said the three strikes legislation had safeguards. It couldn't apply to young people under 18. It was only for very serious violent and sex crimes, and it only came after direct warnings from the judge. Now, he said that none of those safeguards applied to the defendants. He said that the legislation was introduced to be a punitive sentence, but it was balanced on the circumstances of the offender and the offence. He said that there were factors like the defendant's age and the time lapse between their convictions that were taken into account, but life without parole for these two wouldn't be unjust. And he said, again, Turner and Harrison didn't meet these criteria.
OK, what did Turner's lawyer say, Edward?
Yeah, well, Nicholas Chisnell said that the Crown's appeal effectively amounted to the Crown wanting to remove all hope from his client that he'd ever get out of prison. He said Turner was just 29 years old when he was sentenced, and he said that with current mortality statistics, a life sentence could mean his client would spend the next 60 years inside prison. He said that would amount to a disproportionate sentence and be in breach of the Bill of Rights Act, and Mr Chisnell will continue his arguments tomorrow.
Edward Gay, live from our Wellington newsroom. Edward's been in the Court of Appeal in Wellington. Thank you very much indeed, Edward. The Prime Minister, John Key, has just arrived in Fiji for the start of his official visit. It was the first visit by a New Zealand leader since Fiji's military coup in 2006. Our political reporter, Benedict Collins, is with the Prime Minister in Suva and joins us on the phone now. Hi, Benedict. You've just arrived. Anything happened since you've touched down in Fiji?
Yeah, good evening, John. Yes, it has. So we got off the plane and the Prime Minister, John Key, he was met by the Fijian Prime Minister, Frank Bainimarama, straight off the plane. And then he came through to a formal salute by about 100 soldiers out on the tarmac at the airport. And then we were raced across Suva in a police convoy, and we've just arrived at a traditional Fijian welcoming ceremony, which I believe involves a bit of kava. So the Prime Minister's partaking at the moment.
What is the significance, kava aside and ceremonial stuff aside, what is the significance of this visit, Benedict?
Yeah, right. So in 2006, Frank Bainimarama, he overthrew the government here in a military coup. And after that, diplomatic relations between the two countries, they were pretty much frozen. Things were, very icy for quite a few years. In 2014, the Fijian government, they returned to democracy. They held elections, and that New Zealand government always said, hey, that was, a key step the Fijians had to take if relations were to improve. And since then, things have started to improve. The Defence Minister's been over. John Key did meet with Frank Bainimarama on the sidelines of the United Nations meeting. And now, things are really being formalised here with this step, with John Key coming to Fiji for a formal visit.
Thanks so much, Benedict, who will be filing from Fiji over the next couple of days. Benedict Collins, our political reporter. Let's stay in our neighbourhood. The University of Papua New Guinea in Port Moresby has been likened to a war zone. A day after unrest flared that saw police open fire on protesting students. Real confusion about this last night. Police shot at the students at the University of PNG campus after refusing to allow them to walk to Parliament to show support for a planned vote of no confidence against Prime Minister Peter O'Neill. Around 20 people, mostly students, were hospitalised, mainly with injuries from police bullet wounds. Johnny Blades has more.
4 of the students who were hospitalised are understood to be in a critical condition. Today, shocked students back at the campus have been taking stock. A member of the Student Representative Council, Hercules Jim, described an unprovoked attack on the students.
There was no stone throwing from the students or any weapon used by the students to attack the police. And then they shoot without any warning. The police went into the campus, throwing tear gas into the halls of residents, getting the students out of the campus dormitories again, and then shooting them. It was a war zone yesterday at the University of Papua New Guinea campus.
A day on, there are fears for dozens of students who remain unaccounted for, according to another student, Zach Yakap.
The students ran everywhere. The students ran into nearby bushes where the police also followed through and shot them. So those that we could find and those that could make their way towards public help made it to the hospital, and we're not certain of where the others are.
The former Chief Justice, Sir Arnold Ahmet, says the police actions were a gross violation of freedom of expression and assembly. The students have been boycotting classes and protesting for over 5 weeks, demanding that Prime Minister Peter O'Neill stand aside to face fraud allegations. Sir Arnold says it was a bad sign when the university last month asked police in to patrol the campus.
It was very heavy-handed, and quite frankly the government has handled this very, very poorly.
The Prime Minister and Police Commissioner both deflected blame for the unrest yesterday, fingering members of the parliamentary opposition and outside agitators for fuelling discontent among the students. However, Sir Arnold says it's mischievous of Peter O'Neill to suggest that the students have been manipulated by others. He points out that the nationwide university protests have been peacefully conducted, but that the authorities' handling of the situation has ratcheted up the tension unnecessarily.
So the potential for the escalation of agitation by civil society, relatives, and generally the public, as appears to have happened in Port Moresby and in Lae, we just need to be cautious and try to avoid that. A front-on confrontation is not going to be helpful.
Meanwhile, the university last night obtained a court order which disallows students from taking actions which are contrary to their enrolment, banning them from making further protests. But the students say they are not going to back down on their demand for Peter O'Neill's resignation, and over the next day or two will be meeting to decide on their next course of action. This is Johnny Blades.
Just past 8 minutes to 6. The dream of a predator-free mainland, i.e. the South Island, is a step closer with the development of new technologies that promises to wipe out rats, stoats and possums. In fact, this would be over the entire country. Hopefully, eventually, Zero Invasive Predators, a group backed by DOC, the Next Foundation, the Morgan Foundation and Jasmine Social Enterprises, has developed a range of traps and lures that are currently being tested. The most promising ones will be taken to a new predator facility funded by a group of dairy companies for further testing. This really could make a difference. If you're watching online or on Freeview Channel 50, our Christchurch reporter Conan Young visited Zip's research facility this afternoon, where he met members Elaine Murphy and Duncan Kay. Now, Conan began by asking Duncan Kay about, wait for it, the automated stoat trap.
So this is our trap that we call our Ton 200. So it's a stoat and a rat trap. So it's pretty standard traps, the DOC 200s, which are standard tools for killing stoats and rats. But I guess we've developed the architecture of the box. So if we look through this tunnel, we look straight through it, so it creates a tunnel. So the rat or the stoat looks through it, they can't see the traps. And some work that we've done previously has showed us that we get more catches when we have that. So we've had this trap designed. We've been using this trap since we've been at Bottle Rock, which is our field site. And in the last wee while, we've been working on automating these traps. So we want to get to a stage where we can be really efficient with our work. So a human needs to go and get a stoat or a rat out of a trap, but they don't need to go and look at every trap to see whether there's a stoat or a rat in there. So we've done the work now to build a little tool that can now report to us each day what traps have gone off, and then we can go to those traps and service those traps and then get on with the rest of our day.
And that'll just make a huge difference in terms of the efficiency at which you're able to get rid of these little beggars.
Yeah, definitely. So it's about efficiency, and that allows us to scale up. So it means that we can do large scale work because we're only going to those tools that need to be looked at. So yeah, it's a good leap forward.
And so I'll get you to actually demonstrate for us in a sec just how effective these traps can be. They're a little more lethal than your average mouse trap, that's for sure. But Elaine, we've got another method of getting rid of, or at least attracting stoats to these traps. And so what can you tell us about that?
Yes, so traditionally a food lure is used, or like rabbit is great for stoats, but that might only perhaps get 90% of the stoats, and we're after every single one. So we've been looking looking into social laws. So we've been looking at the bedding from around the stoats we have, which has an attractive smell, and we've been doing trials here at Lincoln University, and we have some great videos of the stoats really going to town on. We use these like tea egg infuser things, so you can put the stoat bedding in it, and then we can put them in the traps to attract the stoats, but you can also use it for monitoring stoats, because we also want to know, have we got rid of every last stoat? So we're trying to develop these laws, and we've been working with Plant and Food, because the ideal would be to like distill this bedding into a long life liquid law. So that's our aim.
Yeah, so I suppose you can only get so much bedding, and there's probably not enough bedding to go around all of these stoats.
Well, we did wonder whether it would be cheaper to have a stoat farm than pay for all the analysis.
And so, look, you've got some bedding here. Do you want to just bring that up here? And so this is, yeah. I'm going to put my nose inside this and tell the listeners. Ooh, that's not too bad, actually.
No, I know.
I was expecting it to be worse.
That's right. I mean, and stoats are very clean animals. We started off looking at urine and scats because they've had a lot of Landcare have had a lot of success with that for possums. And with our stoats, they weren't so keen on the urine and scats, but because stoats are very clean animals. They sort of have their latrine away from where they sleep. So we thought, well, perhaps other stoats would be interested in where they're sleeping. So that's when we went to the bedding, it was much more attractive than the urine and scats.
And have we got any sort of figures on how much more effective it is than, say, using a traditional food lure?
Well, we've just done one preliminary trial in the Abel Tasman, and we caught. It was 13 stoats with the stoat bedding and 6 with array, so it was twice as many, but unfortunately our trial got cut short because they did an aerial 1080 operation, which was great for the park, but unfortunately our trial got cut short. But we're just setting up another one in Lake Rotowiti, in Nelson Lakes National Park, and also in Northland, so we're hoping to get a lot more figures. So that's what we've got to decide, to go to try to get that long life lure is going to be quite a commitment, and we want to make absolutely certain that it is worthwhile.
Right. And so, Duncan, as promised, we better show everybody who can see this how these other traps, more traditional, I suppose, traps work. So I'll leave it over to you.
Cool. So we've got a little magnet that's sitting on here. So it's encased in plastic. It's a bit hard to see, but essentially this is the node which reports back to a satellite, and that then reports to us what's happened. And we'll see it when I flip it over, but it sits on the top here connecting with the magnet, and when it's connected with the magnet it says it's unset, but when it disconnects from the magnet then it tells us that it's gone off. So we can see there, this is sort of what it looks like when it's closed. We've got the node sitting there, and that would be saying to us the trap's all good, you don't need to visit it. But when something crawls in, so I'll use my little bit of plastic to crawl in. If we look at this bit of plastic with the magnet on it, it'll fall off.
Wow, and nothing survives that.
No. And when it falls off, it'll then report to us that this trap has gone off.
That was Colin Young in Christchurch. Wonderful contraptions. Although if you're a stoat and you were listening or watching, obviously you're going to have a fairly miserable evening. The time is coming up to 1 minute to 6. After 6 o'clock, we're going to tell you before the news tonight what we're having after the news, because we've got lots to fit in after 6. New statistics reveal Māori home ownership has plummeted in the past 25 years. This is really material in the current context of the discussions around Auckland property, homelessness and all those kinds of things. Our reporter Tom Furley gets a sneak peek inside Auckland's new Waterview connection. The All Blacks name an experienced lineup to play Wales and Auckland this weekend. Our sports reporter Joe Porter is going to join us in the studio, we believe, to discuss this. And Sam Neill joins us from Australia to tell us why the hunt for the Wilder people has become such a hit across the ditch. It really is going off over there. The Aussies are loving it. It's set a box office record for New Zealand, locally produced New Zealand movies. It's already done 3 million in a very short time in Australia, and more cinemas are picking up on it. So we're going to discuss that with Sam after the news at 6. All of that coming up. But in 5 seconds, we're just going to have a little break now and really savour the pips. Here they are. Kia ora everyone, you are with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Thank you for being with us. We are, of course, on Radio New Zealand as we have been since RNZ began, and we're also screening live on Freeview Channel 50 and streaming live on the RNZ website. Feedback, text 2101 or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. A lot coming up in the next 29 and a half minutes, and we begin with RNZ News with Sharon Brett-Kelly.
Kia ora, good evening. Two major banks have placed heavy restrictions on lending to foreign buyers who want to buy houses in New Zealand. Westpac says it will no longer lend to non-resident borrowers with overseas income, and ANZ has also imposed a range of tough new requirements. Here's our political reporter May Heron.
Both ANZ and Westpac will require foreign borrowers to have at least a 30% deposit, up from 15%. ANZ will also only lend to people who plan to live in the houses they buy. Westpac says borrowers on temporary resident visas will only be accepted if they have both a New Zealand address and New Zealand-based income. Westpac says it has had trouble verifying foreign applications, and the move is part of its ongoing review of lending criteria in a fast-moving market. The Housing Minister, Nick Smith, says he's not worried, and the banks are perfectly entitled to make their own decisions. He says the government does not tell them who they should loan money to. From Parliament, May Heron.
And the Reserve Bank is considering introducing even tougher rules for property investors to rein in surging house prices. As Governor Graham Wheeler says, prices are accelerating in Auckland and other regions, and it's adding to concerns about the health of the financial system. At present, Auckland property investors cannot borrow more than 70% of the value of a property. Mr. Wheeler refused to say whether the limit would be lowered or whether investors outside Auckland would be included, but he hinted they're likely to be introduced before the end of the year. He says measures to introduce loan limits based on income levels are also in the pipeline, but they remain some way off. The search for a 2-year-old girl and a 66-year-old man missing after their vehicle got stuck while trying to cross a swollen West Coast river has been suspended for the night. The 4-wheel drive was stranded, semi-submerged, when the driver tried to ford the Poirua River about 80 kilometres south of Hokitika. Ruth Hill reports.
The West Coast Area Commander, Inspector Melanie Aiken, who was at the scene, says the police, 2 helicopters and whitewater rescue teams have been scouring the river. Search and rescue staff have been checking the banks and surrounds. Ms Aiken says the search has been called off because of the deteriorating weather and river levels and will resume as soon as light and weather conditions permit. She says the police have grave fears for the safety of the missing pair. This is Ruth Hill.
A cure for hepatitis C and a drug for advanced melanoma are among 6 new treatments Pharmac has announced it will fund. Pharmac is using the $124 million it's been given in the latest budget for the treatments that will help 40,000 people during the next 4 years. Its chief executive, Stefan Krauser, says the drugs include Opdivo for advanced melanoma treatments for nephrotic syndrome in children, patches for menopausal women, and a new drug for brain tumours. Mr. Krauser told Checkpoint the 2 drugs for treating hepatitis C are very new.
Hepatitis C in its end stages can be really devastating, and this treatment cures the virus in most people and basically gets rid of all that effect and lets them move on. I think it's just such a great result for New Zealand patients.
Stefan Krauser says Pharmac welcomes the input of the health sector and the public when making its funding decisions. Hepatitis C affects an estimated 50,000 New Zealanders, half of whom are undiagnosed. The fishing company Tallies has been fined more than $70,000 in order to pay $21,000 in reparations to the family of a crewman decapitated by a faulty rope. Leighton Muir was killed in 2014 when the rope, which had snapped 3 weeks earlier, broke and whipped back as a net full of tuna was being hauled in Kiribasa's exclusive economic zone. Maritime New Zealand's compliance manager Harry Hawthorne says a knot had been used to join the rope, even though there was a replacement on board. In 2012, another crew member died in the same vessel, the Captain MJ Souza, after falling nearly 7 metres through an open hatch. The husband of a zookeeper killed by a tiger says the Hamilton City Council has poorly handled the case. The council today pleaded guilty in the Hamilton District Court to failing to protect Sam Kudaway, who died after being attacked by the 11-year-old male tiger at the city zoo in September last year. Ms Kudaway's husband, Richard, says the council took too long to take responsibility for her death, harming their family.
We understand Sam is not coming back, and it is very important to us that the people who are responsible own up to that and do something about it. Today, the people responsible for the health and safety breach that ultimately killed Sam have been made to take responsibility.
Richard Kudaway says an incident in 2013 when a keeper had a close call with a tiger should have been all the warning signs the zoo needed. The council will be sentenced in September. To sport now, in the All Blacks first five, Aaron Cruden admits he's a little more nervous than usual ahead of Saturday's test against Wales in Auckland. Cruden will play his first test in over a year and a half, having missed last year's World Cup through injury. He also has the job of taking over from Dan Carter following his international retirement.
It's been a long time since my last test, so extremely excited. A few nerves floating around as well, which I think are only natural. But yeah, when I found out earlier in the week that I was going to be starting, I sort of couldn't help but have a smile on my face. And now it's just about getting out there, nailing my role and enjoying the occasion.
Meanwhile, the Highlanders have appointed Tony Brown as head coach for next season, replacing Jamie Joseph, who is leaving to coach the Japan national side. New Zealand's world golf #1 Lydia Ko will attempt to win her third successive major when she tees off at the LPGA Championship in Washington tomorrow morning. This time last year, Ko was still trying to win her first major and admits the pressure of trying to become the youngest women's major champion was stifling, but in hindsight believes it helped her development. She's not, however, in the best of form and concedes simply making the cut would be a good start.
Everybody in this room was saying, when is she going to win a major? Is she going to win a major? And I think winning Evian kind of gave me a bit of a relief. I think I've been very fortunate with, winning Evian and winning ANA, and they've been really spectacular weeks for me. But for this week, I'm going to try and play 4 days this tournament.
That's Lydia Ko, and that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, dealing with the dead. Because the dead can't bury themselves, Fiona King has been studying the history of undertaking in Aotearoa and reckons a more do-it-yourself approach wouldn't go amiss. Not that she's advocating suicide. Our Changing World asks what the colour of seaweed tells us about marine pollution, and Charlotte Wilson from RNZ Concert shares a few new classical releases on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel mostly cloudy with rain at times. Clearing in Northland for a time tomorrow. Waikato to Taranaki, also Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Occasional rain with some heavy falls possible about the ranges tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairarapa, high cloud thickening and scattered rain spreading from the west at times. Whanganui to Taihape to Wellington, high cloud with scattered rain developing by evening, occasional rain tomorrow. Nelson and northern Marlborough, rain at times, possibly heavy, clearing tomorrow evening. The remainder of Marlborough, Canterbury and central and north Otago, high cloud and a few spots of rain. Bulla to Fiordland, periods of rain with some heavy and possibly thundery falls. Dunedin, Clutha and Southland, becoming fine, a few showers tomorrow. And the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, rain tomorrow, possibly heavy.
Thank you very much indeed. Sharon Brick-Kelly with the news, 9 minutes past 6. New statistics reveal Māori home ownership has plummeted in the past 25 years, with rates in some parts of the North Island dropping by as much as 40%. A Statistics New Zealand report says since 1986, the average drop in ownership was 20% for Māori, compared with 15% for the total population. Laura Bootham from Te Manu Kōrehi has more.
With stories of homelessness and squalid rental properties in the spotlight, Statistics New Zealand has released what Māori housing organisations describe as sober reading. The Statistics New Zealand report used census figures from 1986 through to 2013 and found while ownership rates for all New Zealanders peaked in 1991, when 3/4 of the population had their own home, it's been all downhill for Māori and Pacifica since then. The report's author, Rosemary Goodyear, says as well as big falls in home ownership in the cities, Māori ownership in provincial towns has also suffered.
In the worst hit areas for Māori, declines in home ownership were close to 40%, and that was in the Whangarei, Southern Auckland, Tauranga, Rotorua and Hastings urban areas, particularly in the Upper North Island, where we're seeing that decline.
Dr Goodyear says the decline in home ownership rates for all Pacific people in Auckland was similar, down more than 40% in Western and Southern Auckland. She says the number of Māori having to rent privately has increased dramatically.
It's increased by 88.3% since 1986. So we know that there's been that large increase in Māori living in private rentals as well as a fall in people living in owner-occupied dwellings. And that compares with a fall for the total population of 42.7%.
Dame Tariana Turia, a former Associate Minister for Housing and co-leader of the Māori Party, isn't surprised. Dame Tariana says more Māori have lost their jobs. She says the solution is to introduce a living wage.
It is a really significant and serious issue. It kind of seems almost unbelievable in a country that essentially is a land of milk and money, that's how they used to describe us, that people can no longer even get a decent living from being here in their land. I think it's shocking.
Te Matapihi National Māori Housing Organisation's chairperson, Rau Hoskins, says mainstream housing doesn't work for Māori. He says the solution is more money to build on Māori land and to restructure Māori housing.
Recognise how sobering these statistics are and the cost to the country in terms of the health, the education, the social and the courts. Many of these issues can be sheeted right back home to housing situations. If government can actually see that if they spend $1 in housing, they will save many dollars throughout the rest of the government's expenditure.
The University of Otago Professor of Public Health, Michael Baker, says the drop in ownership for Māori and Pacifica is a major concern, and not just for the health sector.
One of the most serious problems is the lack of security. So households in a rental situation tend to have a lot more mobility and they're changing houses regularly. So all of this adds up to a great deal of disadvantage for those who are spending potentially their whole lives now in rental housing, and not just for poorer health outcomes, it's also poor educational outcomes.
Statistics New Zealand says it hopes the information will be useful to those developing policy around home ownership and renting. For Checkpoint, ko Laura Bootham Tēnei.
Kia ora, Laura. It is coming up to 6:13. Joe Porter is in the studio to discuss the All Blacks team. So we're talking sport. The All Blacks named an experienced and familiar-looking lineup, for the most part, for the first test of the 2016 calendar year.
Absolutely, as they look to maintain what is a rather incredible unbeaten run against Wales, one of sport's greatest unbeaten streaks. And of course, there are only a couple of new faces in this team, Ardie Savea, loose forward, and midfielder Setha Tamanivalu, who was somewhat of a surprise, although Hansen thinks this guy has the goods, and he wasn't going to be taking any risks in this first test following the World Cup.
Most of the pundits out there, I think, could have picked the team themselves. I mean, I think we've got 3 changes or 4 changes from the team that started the last World Cup, and 2 of those are injury force, so the other 4 guys, Carter and McCaw and the 2 midfielders, obviously had to be replaced, so that's what we've done.
Nonu and Conrad Smith, I mean, it's one of the greatest midfield combinations in the history of rugby. So they are moving to...
They've got Ryan Crotty starting at second 5, Malakai Fekitoa at centre. So guys who have both been there before, they've played about 28 tests between them, but not many as starting midfield combinations. Look at the Welsh on the other hand, Jamie Roberts.
Yeah.
Jonathan Davies, they've played over 100 tests between them. They're big running lads, and they're going to be sending a whole lot of action down Crotty and Fekitoa's channel. So defence is probably going to be the area where they're really tested. Fekitoa, not a huge communicator. Crotty will probably be tasked with that. So it's going to be an interesting test, and that's probably the most intriguing, I guess, part of this All Blacks.
And the other thing is, and it's difficult to say this because they'll prove me wrong, I'm sure, on Saturday night, but the All Blacks are often crap in their first game of the year. I mean, for example, a few years ago I went to see them play Canada in Hamilton. Abysmal, truly abysmal. They just don't quite gel first up.
Well, absolutely, and Hansen knows that rust will be there. This is why he's not taking any risks, and he's picked Aaron Cruden, as predicted, to start at first 5'8" instead of Bowden Barrett or Lima Sopoaga. Cruden hasn't played in 19 months, but I guess Hansen is so confident in his abilities and has had faith in who was the incumbent before Dan Carter took over again last year to take this on. So despite the fact that Aaron Cruden is filling Dan Carter's boots, taking over after 19 months out of the game, He's looking forward to this match, and of course, he's got to play his own style of game. He knows that, so he's trying not to emulate Dan Carter. He's simply trying to be himself.
You know, for me, I'm not trying to fill Dan Carter's boots. I'm just trying to be Aaron Cruden, and I guess I get the first opportunity this week to wear that number 10 jersey. So, as you said, it's been 19 months since my last test, so I'm really looking forward to this one and getting out there and, I guess testing myself in the test match arena and the challenge that Wales are going to bring.
Aaron Cruden, I hope he goes well.
Oh, me too.
Boy,
me too. He's a good lad.
Yeah. Right, what else are you going to tell us about our Joe?
Well, Richie McCaw's heir apparent, Sam Cane, he's been waiting in the wings to take over at open side. Another one of Hanson's early picks that people sort of went, this guy doesn't even start for the Chiefs yet. Hanson saw something, and now I guess that's coming to fruition. So I guess Cane takes his place in the starting 15 under a little bit of pressure from Adi Savea, who really has been a revelation this Super Rugby season. But of course, Cane, it only motivates him to play better when others are chasing his tail.
Pretty much every year of Super Rugby, I've been battling with guys just to play, and you guys might say I was waiting for this opportunity, but in the last few years, my mentality had been to try and fight for the 7 jersey myself. So it's just rugby the way it is, and it's one of the strengths of the New Zealand game. So it's not something that you'd change or get used to. It's just the way it is. It's good.
Right, Joe, we're out of time, but who's going to win on Saturday night?
Oh, the All Blacks, of course. Wales have beaten us in 63 years. 1953 was the last time it happened. The All Blacks haven't been beaten by anyone at Eden Park in 22 years.
Unbelievable.
There is simply no way. A popsicle has a better chance of not melting in hell than Wales do of beating us on Saturday night.
Joe Porter throwing down the gauntlet. Thanks, Joe. We'll have more from you tomorrow, right?
My pleasure.
Thanks, Joe. Joe Porter, live in the studio here in Auckland. Paving on one of the country's largest road tunnels is nearing completion with work on Auckland's Waterview connection on track to finish next year. The $1.4 billion project, which has been ongoing since 2012, is being hailed as one of the country's largest and most ambitious roading projects. Half of the project is underway with twin 2.4k tunnels linking Auckland's southwestern and northwestern motorways, looping round by the airport. Today, our reporter Tom Furley had a look around. So what did he see?
Hi John, so today we had a tour of the Waterview Tunnel, obviously part of the Waterview connection, and really I think the last thing people would have seen from this is the footage that came out when obviously the machine, which they called Alice, broke through. That was back in October, but since then they've done quite a bit of work to it. It's changed quite a bit, so about half of that big circle has been built up with the road, so they've paved about 50% of one of the tunnels, and that's due to be completed over the next few weeks, and then they'll be moving on to the adjacent one. But basically they've moved into a fitting out period. So what they've done is they've been putting in lights and electrical equipment, all the mechanical equipment as well, and obviously the fire safety equipment too. So it's looking through today. It's a long stretch. It's 2.4 kilometres, so it's about twice the length of the harbour bridge, and really it's quite spectacular. I mean, it opens up onto the interchange here, which a lot of motorists in Auckland will have seen. It's it's along the northwestern motorway there. So that in itself is reaching completion as well. They've done the large pylons that will carry the road, so there's just a few more barriers and things to complete on that road, but they say that they're confident that they're on track and that things will be open and ready for commuters at the start of next year.
Thanks, Tom. The Chief Justice, Dame Sian Elias, has saluted the life and work of Māori leader Sir Graham Latimer at his tangi in Northland. Dame Sian was one of the lawyers who represented Sir Graham and the Māori Council in their historic appeal court win in 1987, which upheld the Treaty of Waitangi, stopped the transfer of Māori land to the new SOEs and led major settlements, including fisheries. Really important. Dame Sian said Sir Graham changed New Zealand and the way New Zealanders see themselves.
He was very modest, and I remember being in the Legislative Council chamber once after the land case, when we were trying to work out what on earth to do with this big fish we've been caught. And the government didn't know what to do, so we had so Graham and his colleagues had to try and work out what should be done. And we were sitting there, and the clerk of the House of Parliament came in and said, the mongrel mob are outside. What shall we do? And Graham said, well, let them in. So they came in and they sat quietly for a couple of hours, I think, until their spokesman got up and mehied to Graham and said, "We thought you old people were mad taking that case to the Court of Appeal, and we want to say that we are proud of you." Now Graham, who was so very modest, I looked at him and he looked 10 feet tall to me, very quietly.
A lovely story from Dame Sian Elias, one of the lawyers who acted in that historic appeal court win in 1987. She said today she was also paying tribute to a friend. 21 minutes past 6. It's already New Zealand's highest grossing locally produced film of all time, and it set box office records for the highest grossing opening weekend for all movies from anywhere in New Zealand. That's in New Zealand. Now Hunt for the Wilder People has passed $3 million at the Australian box office, and it's picking up momentum over their hugely warm critical responses. Its US releases in a fortnight. Earlier today I spoke with Sam Neill, who stars in the film as Uncle Heck, and asked him what it is about the film that has Australians flocking to see something that is very, very Kiwi.
I think it's a lot of things, but mostly because it's got heart and it seems authentic, and people are very touched by it and they find it very funny. And of course they miss some of the New Zealand illusions which we get, but it doesn't seem to matter. It seems to play internationally just as well as it does at home.
That's an exciting thing, isn't it? Because as New Zealanders, and you know this and everyone listening will know this, we've watched EastEnders and we've watched Ken Loach films and Mike Leigh films and American movies with southern twangs in, and we've assimilated that culture into our own, but we've been much less forthcoming about the right for us to take our culture to the world. And that's something that Taika's been doing, that the Concords have been doing, and this is absolutely what this film does.
Yes. And the Flight of the Concords, I mean, who would have imagined that Americans would get their jokes? They seem so specifically New Zealand, but, there's a lesson in this. If you try and do films that you think a Hollywood audience will enjoy, it never works.
Well, Hollywood's already doing that, isn't it, Sam? I mean, our point of difference is us, isn't it?
That's right. That's completely right. But I think what elevates the whole film is the authenticity of the reporters in the film, not just yourself. And by the way, I have been told reliably that there's a fair New Zealand contingent that, in Australia, whenever you come on the screen, there's a round of applause.
They're just delighted I've got work, Sam, I think. What was it like to make? I mean, had you met Julian Dennison previously?
No, I didn't know Julian. I walked into we met at a costume fitting, and I was a little apprehensive because I knew I'd be spending 6 weeks with a kid, and
yes.
If he didn't get on, it'd be a pretty trying 6 weeks. But I liked Julian immediately. He's a great kid. I love him to death, and he's very funny. So I loved having that time with him, and we're still friends.
Isn't that funny? Because I sense that's the appropriate word. You are friends. And isn't he a remarkable young guy? Because he ought to be now off the rails. I mean, he ought to be going Bieber, really. Should he throwing eggs at the neighbour's house and behaving badly? He should be. But there's none of that going on. He remains still grounded and wonderfully himself.
I think that's he's a smart kid, and comes from a very good, large family who keep him grounded. And, he's completely unimpressed by anything that attaches to celebrity. So, he's from Naina. Of course he's sensible.
Have you watched it with an Australian audience? I know you've been doing the rounds and boy, the marketing has been impressive and clever and engaging and all that stuff. But have you actually gone and sat in a cinema with an Australian audience and watched Wilder People over there?
I haven't sat through the whole thing, but I've come in at the beginning and at the end. Julian and I and Taika did a little mini tour, and we'd come in and introduce the film and then come and do a Q&A at the end. And it is, I have to say, it's one of the most wonderful things when you walk into a cinema to spontaneous applause. But actually, the other odd thing is I get calls from friends that say, I went to the Dendy at a 3 o'clock session yesterday, and at the end, the audience burst into spontaneous applause. People clap at the end of this film. That never happens, does it?
No, the session I went to, people clapped. In part, it's because, the simple truth of Julian's character is that he has been abandoned, that he's fallen through the cracks of the system, that he is alone in the world, that there is really no one to turn to. And that is a very contemporaneous story. That is a very timely story in New Zealand. And it's actually a sad and dark story, but it's redeemed because there is love and there is possibility and there is, and it doesn't seem corny, it does seem right, a happy ending. Is that what people love about it?
I think that's true, because it is about serious things, and there is grief and abandonment, and a sad undercurrent that goes all the way through the film. And if you read it on paper, you might think, it sounds a bit sickly and sentimental to me, but in fact, it's quite dry and avoids all sentimentality, and people sort of appreciate that. Also, I think probably people are a little bit possibly tired with enormous CGI films where cities get destroyed and super people with superpowers fly around. I don't know. It's kind of not just contemporary, but it sort of harks back to films when they had a little more heart, when they had a little more compassion and human interest. I don't know. I'm only speculating, John. It's just the sort of feedback I'm getting, but it is. I've never really had feedback from anything I've done before like this.
Wow. In your long and venerable career, Sam, that's pretty wonderful.
Venerable.
It's venerable? Take it on the chin, man.
Vintage actor, Sam. It was veteran, and now I'm vintage.
Have you got your walking frame there, Sam? You all right? Speaking of all right, you've just pulled out of something. Pierce Brosnan's going to replace you. What's going on there?
Oh, look, nothing dramatic. There's my doctor. Got some minor surgery. It's been overdue for quite a while, and then he said, look, we can't postpone this anymore. You just got to get it done. It's nothing dramatic. And so it was ill-timed, and so I've had to withdraw from the Sun. It's a really good job. And my friend Pierce Brosnan's taking over, and he'll be much better.
Well, he won't be as good looking as you. He won't be as good looking, Sam.
No, I have advised them, the wonderful producers are. I said, look, the only thing about Pierce is his ridiculous Irish good looks. I would encourage you to have the makeup department give him a good dose of 19th century syphilis. Pustules and craters could do a tremendous amount for the whole look of the show. But I don't think they're going to take me up on that. But Pierce is a wonderful actor. He's a very old and close friend of mine, so I'm happy to see him in it.
Well, you look after yourself, Sam Neill, and congratulations on the extraordinary success of Will to People, and it's lovely to talk to you as always.
It's very nice to talk to a co-star.
Sam Neill, who really is a delightful man. We haven't got long to go, but there was a beautiful Q&A with him in The Guardian recently, and someone asked him, what is the worst thing that anyone's ever said to him? And his reply was, the worst things anyone's ever said to me is, did we sleep together? Really? He is a delight, that man, Sam Neill. A nice way to end our show for tonight. On behalf of our really excellent and hard-working Checkpoint team, thank you for being with us. We will be back tomorrow night at 5 o'clock. It's 6:30 in about 8 seconds, but let's listen to the thing.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Two major banks have placed heavy restrictions on lending to foreign buyers who want to buy houses in New Zealand. And the Reserve Bank is considering introducing even tougher rules for property investors to rein in surging house prices. The search for a 2-year-old girl and a 66-year-old man missing from a vehicle stuck in a swollen West Coast river has been suspended for the night. A cure for hepatitis C and a drug for advanced melanoma are among 6 new treatments Pharmac will fund. Our next news and weather at 7. Here's Alex Perrottet with World Watch.
Welcome to World Watch PM. I'm Alex Perrottet. Tonight, the UN declares war again on AIDS.